We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for being here. This is a series that we've been very excited to put on with the Nalanda Institute. I'm Carolyn from Tricycle, and we are here today for Conversations in Contemplative Psychotherapy, Deepening Personal and Social Transformation. This is day one, which we are going to offer today an introduction to the field of contemplative psychotherapy, and that will come from Joe. And then we'll get into our panel discussion today, which will be focused on mindfulness. And today's event will be recorded, so if you miss it or would like to watch it again, we will make that available via email after the event. We'll also be making some time for questions at the end of today's event. So at any point during the session, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A tab, and we'll get to as many as we can. And also, this is a donation-based event, and we're happy to offer events like this free of charge. Your support really makes a difference. So if you would like to support the Nalanda Institute for Contemplative Science or the Tricycle Foundation, we'll drop the links to both of our organizations in the chat. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce Joe, who will be kicking off the event today. Joe Luizzo, MD, PhD, is a psychiatrist, clinical researcher, and meditation scholar teacher who integrates neuroscience with contemplative practice to help people sustain personal well-being, interpersonal compassion, and transformational leadership. Assistant professor at Weill Cornell Medical College and founder of the nonprofit Nalanda Institute for Contemplative Science, he's published dozens of chapters and articles on the benefits and mechanisms of meditation in peer-reviewed publications, including the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences and Frontiers in Human Neuroscience. His books include Boundless Leadership, Sustainable Happiness, and Advances in Contemplative Psychotherapy, which is actually the basis of this event, and we'll provide more information about that book in a follow-up email. Joe offers classes and workshops internationally through the Nalanda Institute and maintains a private practice in Manhattan. So welcome, Joe. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. And we're so grateful to you and your team at Tricycle for making this conference, this summit, a possibility. Just thrilled to be here today to share something that's really been my life's work, and an incredible group of colleagues who've created, who've helped sort of create the field over the years. So first of all, just to share, we're at an unprecedented time when we have such a crisis in mental health following the pandemic and all the social and collective traumas and stresses that have arisen. And this summit offers a complete introduction to one of the most promising movements in psychological healing and in psychosocial well-being. That is the growing integration of contemplative wisdom and practices into contemporary psychotherapy. So therapy is integrating mindfulness, loving kindness, mindful self-compassion have been proven to be more effective than conventional approaches to some of the most challenging forms of psychic suffering. And that includes addiction, depression, self-harm. And obviously, they've already become mainstream methods for building resilience, presence, benevolence, and generally for personal and social well-being. So what we're here to do is sort of get you current on how mindfulness is being integrated into the world of contemplative healing, but also to sort of prepare this to make you aware of a larger spectrum of Buddhist psychology and practice beyond mindfulness that's increasingly being incorporated as well into the dialogue with neuroscience and psychotherapy. Those traditions include the arts of compassion, compassion for self and others, and embodied methods like imagery, movement, and breath work. And there's a whole third wave. So we often talk about three waves of contemplative psychotherapy and psychosocial healing, mindfulness being the first that we may be most familiar with, compassion-based approaches and embodied approaches. And these embodied approaches have been, and compassionate approaches have been also really very effective and promising remedies for for chronic self-criticism, relationship and family challenges, childhood and adult trauma, and also the larger collective traumas caused by racism, gender oppression, and other forms of systemic violence. So this summit brings together some of the leading figures in this incredible confluence of traditions. And we're going to have 3 panels, and one is dedicated to mindfulness approaches today. Next week, we're going to be focusing on compassion-based approaches. And finally, on February 3rd, to embodied approaches. And then we're all going to be trying to help connect all of these methodologies, the confluence of neuroscience, psychotherapy, and contemplative science and practice, both in terms of how they benefit individuals and also in terms of their social and collective impact. So each panel brings together prominent Buddhist teachers with contemplative psychotherapists and social change agents to explore how Buddhist wisdom and methods are helping to deepen healing and transformation, not just at the personal and interpersonal levels, but at the collective level of institutions and society as a whole. Today's opening panel is on personal and social healing through mindfulness and loving kindness. And I will introduce our incredible star panel today momentarily. I just first want to give you a little bit more of a context or sense of how I found my way here and how we at Nalanda Institute are working in this incredibly promising field. I've been a lifelong student and practitioner seeking healing and freedom for myself, but also for others and the world in the confluence of spirituality and psychotherapy. And I found Buddhism in particular as an ideal middle way to bridge the Western cultural divide that we've been struggling, it's been growing for centuries, between science and religion. And Ricola to the rescue. So as the dialogue between Buddhism and neuroscience ignited the mindfulness revolution in the 90s, I found myself applying the rich teaching and practice of the Tibetan tradition in which I was trained into contemplative self-healing programs at New York Hospital through Columbia and Cornell. I founded a few years later Nalanda Institute for Contemplative Science to make what I had learned and the programs I developed at Columbia and Cornell publicly available. Nalanda is named for the Indian university that brought Buddhism to Tibet. Really what's unique about it is that this tradition, which is the sort of culmination of centuries of development of contemplative science, contemplative psychology, healing, medicine, spiritual practice, social practice, bridges all the different traditions that exist out there, the various Buddhist traditions that are coming together in today's global, meeting ground. That is the sort of mindfulness-based approaches we know as Theravada approaches from South India, the compassion-focused approaches we know in East Asia as Zen and Pure Land, and the tantric or embodied approaches that especially are active in Central Asia, Tibet, Mongolia, Nepal, Bhutan, etc. So the Nalanda tradition incorporates all of those in a very interesting way. So it serves as a wonderful meeting ground for these different approaches that are already converging. So we'd like to, Nalanda really is, as an institute, is designed to take this rich tradition and weave it into contemporary life, right? Especially to help people wherever they are feeling the stresses and traumas of living and working in the world we live in today, to integrate, to weave the wisdom, the practice, the ethics into their way of being and living to help create healing and transformation in their own life and the world around them. I chose the word contemplative rather than mindful or compassionate for a very specific reason. Contemplative is a word, coming from the Western tradition that really spans across all these different methodologies: mindfulness, compassion, embodied approaches. And it also opens the door to something really important, which is I believe that the bridge that Buddhism has helped to create between spirituality and science and psychotherapy is also one that can be used by all other contemplative traditions, Islamic, Judeo-Christian, Indic, Hindu tradition, indigenous traditions. I think that the basic science, psychology, and healing dimensions are common to all contemplative practice. So that's another reason why I chose the word contemplative. So at Nalanda Institute, all of our programs cover all these three dimensions, what I call the three waves of contemplative science and practice: mindfulness, compassion, and embodiment. And they therefore touch on the mind, the heart, and the body, right? They also focus not just on meditation, which has been the sort of easiest active ingredient that we in the West have taken up from these traditions, but on the three core traditions, the three core disciplines that are seen as indispensable to contemplative learning, living, and healing. That is not just meditation, but wisdom and ethics as well. And then we have the famous metaphor of meditation as a bird, which needs those two wings of wisdom and ethics in order to fly. Those are our programs, and particularly the summit that we're launching today draws on the curriculum and faculty of one of our programs, the program in contemplative psychotherapy. This is a 3-year journey of contemplative learning and transformation that immerses participants in the vibrant dialogue between Buddhist wisdom, meditation, and ethics on the one hand, and contemporary psychotherapy, neuropsychology, and the social justice movement on the other. The summit is meant to introduce you to all we've learned in over 10 years, offering this unprecedented program, to raise consciousness about this incredibly promising field, as well as to anticipate the release of the second edition of our textbook that faculty have contributed to, called Advances in Contemplative Psychotherapy. The second edition of Advances is particularly dedicated to expanding the horizons of the current dialogue between contemplative traditions and psychotherapy, to address how contemplative psychotherapy as a field can break out of its colonizing silo, right? Its sort of narrow focus on medicalized and individualized care, and help as well heal the centuries-old epidemic of collective stress and trauma, recognized recently by the AMA of all institutions, and help challenge and heal some of the harm caused by systemic racism, gender oppression, and other forms of systemic violence. So for more on the potential, I want to really now invite our distinguished panelists. And I'm just so excited to be able to connect you to these dear friends and collaborators who've helped us create this contemplative psychotherapy program. Mustafa Abdel-Rahman is an MBA, but also a registered psychotherapist. He's a meditation teacher and a contemplative therapist in Toronto. He holds a certificate in applied mindfulness meditation and in contemplative psychotherapy, as well as teaching a variety of mindfulness certificate courses at the School of Continuing Studies at the University of Toronto. He facilitates numerous mindfulness workshops for a wide range of corporate and nonprofit organizations, including the Center for Addiction and Mental Health and Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center. He's a senior teacher for the meditation teacher training at Exhale in Toronto, and he leads mindfulness meditation program at 519, a City of Toronto agency supporting the LGBTQ plus communities. So welcome, Mustafa. So great to see you.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Joe. Thank you for having me.
Okay, and I'm now going to introduce our second panelist, Lama Rod Owens, who may not need any introduction. He's considered one of the emerging leaders of his generation of Buddhist teachers. He's an author, activist, and teacher, and co-founder of Bhumi Sparsha, a Buddhist tantric practice community, as well as a visiting teacher with several Buddhist centers, including Natural Dharma Fellowship, the Brooklyn Zen Center, and Nalanda Institute. He's a graduate of Harvard Divinity School. He's been a guest faculty member at the Harvard School of Education's program in Mindfulness for Educators. He's been a regular guest on the SiriusXM's Urban View, hosted by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Karen Hunter. He's also the author of Love and Rage, The Path of Liberation Through Anger, and co-author of Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation. Great to see you again today, Lama Rod. Welcome to our panel. And finally, again, someone else who needs no introduction, Sharon Salzberg, dear friend and meditation teacher, author and co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Mass. She is one of the most prominent Buddhist meditation teachers in the West and has been teaching and leading meditation retreats around the world for over 3 decades. Her writings have appeared in numerous publications, including Time, Yoga Journal, Tricycle of Buddha Dharma, Lion's Roar, and numerous anthologies. She's the author of 10 books, including Love Your Enemies, How to Break the Anger Habit and Be a Whole Lot Happier, co-authored with Robert Thurman, and Real Love, The Art of Mindful Connection. So welcome, Sharon, and welcome all of you. So exciting to spend this time with you trying to unpack something that we believe has the potential to really be healing for a lot of individuals and for the larger community and society as well. So let me just begin perhaps by checking in with Mustafa. I just want to ask you as a therapist, how do you feel contemplative approaches like mindfulness deepen healing and psychotherapy and help people heal through the challenges of everyday life in our stressful world?
Well, first, once again, I want to say hello, everyone, and I want to thank you, Joe, for inviting me to be part of this wonderful panel. I've, similar to your journey and your sharing, I've also found contemplative practices, especially mindfulness, to be quite helpful personally on my journey of self-healing transformation, but also with the work that I do with the populations that I am part of, whether in therapy or with friends, with family and community. And specific to psychotherapy, I find that Eastern Buddhist psychology has been so helpful in terms of how long thousands of years of established practices, well tried and true, to help us shift from states of survivalship to states of resilience. And I think with the innovation and the transformation that we're facing now with neuroscience, we're able to recognize how effective these practices are, and they're finding their way into psychotherapy. There's a lot of research that's showing how efficacy and the evidence around neuroplasticity and how practices such as attention training, self-awareness, increasing window of tolerance can be helpful for our clients or our patients to be able to deepen their recognition of self and hold space for their experiences and experiences of those they're in relationship with. And a byproduct of that, which is probably the most popular element of mindfulness, is feeling more relaxed or more at ease with experiences. But truly the transformation comes from being able to allow experiences, thoughts, emotions to show up and be held with hopefully gentleness, with ease, so that we're able to find new ways of responding to what's showing up for us internally and externally. And doing that in the context of psychotherapy or in the space of where there's a therapeutic relationship can also be helpful in the sense that your client can be able to borrow the sense of groundedness and centeredness of the therapist, so that they're able to co-regulate and be able to hold space together through these practices. So there's many ways that that can show up. And but I'm very excited to how mindfulness is evolving and how, especially in the West, the practice is becoming more nuanced and more welcoming of the tapestry of practices that are related to contemplative therapies. I'm curious to hear also from a panelist, from Sharon and Lamarad, their thoughts as well.
Beautiful. I don't know if either one of you wants to jump in with that, or I have a question for Lamarad, if not. Yeah, so Lamarad, we're wondering how we're connecting the individual, because psychotherapy in the West has been classically thought of as focused on one person at a time. And often sort of really in that part of it, it's part of what we value is that intimacy and the kind of focusing, really being present with one person. But also sometimes that tunnel vision or narrows all the factors in that person's life and the collective as well. Especially we think about how we can address issues like racism and oppressive paradigms that make even just make the accessibility and relevance of psychotherapy in question. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And just a quick hello to everyone who's joining us from all over the world, and a deep appreciation to my fellow panelists as well. To the question, right, of individuality and psychotherapy, yeah, this is a really important conversation, right? Because we have to have the skills and the capacity to understand how individuals actually arises within contexts and within communities and collectives, that we're actually deeply informed by a collectivity, right? And that collectivity is itself informed by systems and institutions, and these systems, particularly of thought and power and privilege, like patriarchy, racism, ableism, ageism, and so forth, right? All these factors come into play in terms of shaping who we are as individuals. So when we're coming into a therapeutic situation, into psychotherapy, those issues have to be examined, right? I don't exist outside of a collective, right? So even my personal problems are actually related to a kind of collectivity, right? That it's often complex to understand, particularly if I'm working with a professional who actually is not looking at or holding those issues of collectivity and the issues of oppression, for instance, right? And so there's an over individualization that may happen, when we're working with people coming from, these collective experiences of oppression and marginalization that can actually deepen harm, right? And bypass these vital issues that we're actually trying to name and experience liberation from in treatment.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I often refer to you as our goddess of loving kindness, since you were one of the early sort of voices bringing that incredibly powerful healing practice into awareness in the West. How have you seen loving kindness and maybe related issues like mindful self-compassion and so on, fostering personal and social healing within psychotherapy? Because I know you've dialogued with a lot of psychotherapists, Mark Epstein and others over the years, and beyond. How about in terms of helping to create a healing culture of empathy, connection, compassion, and so on?
Wow, that's a big question. There's several questions rolled into one. Thank you. When I first started practicing in India, which is 50 years ago, good Lord, the word mindfulness was really kind of a compound, and it was really mindfulness and clear comprehension were together, and so that implied not just remembering or noticing, which mindfulness can sometimes seem to mean, but something much deeper. It implied a whole way you were relating to what you were noticing. Because for clear comprehension to arise, it meant you couldn't be struggling against it, you couldn't be hating it, couldn't be ashamed of it, because that'll leave you in a whole other place than seeing clearly. You also couldn't be over enmeshed in it as well. So the relationship aspect of how you were being aware was always emphasized, and that brought up the question right away of loving kindness, especially toward oneself, because so many people, including myself, had the habit of having all of those. I was afraid of what I was seeing. I was ashamed of it. I was really upset about it. I was 18 years old. I was like disbelieving that, I had such things arising within me. And so the importance of it, even though it was implicit rather than explicit, was always clear to me that was like the missing ingredient. And so being able to play some role in making it more explicit, I felt was really important. And it wasn't always easily accepted, either in general population or even in Buddhist communities, frankly. When, Lama Rai brought up patriarchy, it's like, now I look back at the time, my first book was Loving Kindness. It came out in 1995. And, I look back at how some people reacted, and I realized, like, oh, they're saying it was like a girly practice, it's too sweet, it's going to be sentimental, you're just having people feel better, it's not the real thing. But of course it is the real thing. And so I've been really excited to see over the years how compassion, loving kindness, mindful self-compassion have played a very different role. Can it play a different role, not just personally, but in society? I mean, I think, yes. I think the research, which, you can quote better than I, actually shows loving kindness has, as a practice, has a even more profound effect than strict mindfulness practice, in bringing that forth. Because after all, how do we see each other? How many assumptions are we making? How much agenda are we carrying? Can we let go of that and actually be present with one another in a space of empathy or care? And it seems like it has the potential to change really a lot. You're muted, Joe.
Mute. All right. So
Now you're back. Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, pushing the wrong buttons. That's like our life today. I disappeared, went off into a parallel universe. So thank you so much, all of you. And yeah, I mean, I think that, to me as a therapist, one of the beautiful things about these practices is that they're things that my clients can learn on their own. And so it's not just all about their being in the therapy session, and how I might be affecting them or helping them for that moment. But people can start to really do so much more for themselves and to promote healing. And also, of course, in our contemplative psychotherapy program, one of the things we really emphasize and focus on naturally is how these practices can help an ordinary person who happens to be trained as a therapist provide really, both handle the enormous challenges emotionally to themselves of being present for other people's suffering and trying to bring a kind of, more aware, more mindful, more open, more connected quality of being. So I guess another question I would have maybe for all three of you, if you like, is just how do you think the practices of mindfulness, of self-compassion, of loving kindness could help therapists show up more, in sort of a more genuine, more present, more healing way, or just sort of handle the load of, because as therapists in post-COVID era, we are, everybody's over full, given all the isolation that we've all experienced. So how have you seen, or how do you imagine therapy, these practices can help therapists, have some of the some of the qualities that we've all seen in our spiritual teachers. Anybody want to jump in with that first?
I would, just add briefly that therapists are healers. And personally, I don't want someone trying to heal me who themselves are not working on their own healing in the process. So I see loving kindness, mindfulness, contemplative practice as ways that healers, therapists can actually work on healing, much of their own suffering, right? And so when they enter into, a clinical setting with a client, they have the tools to gently decenter themselves, right? And to offer space for the client to be there. And so they can show up, as fully as possible. As a Dharma teacher, this is, often what I do. I have to make sure that I'm engaged in my own healing. I have to make sure that I'm gathering the resources to meet my own needs. So when I enter into a relationship with a student or a mentee, I am not preoccupied or distracted by my own unmet needs. And I can actually hold the space quite wholly for someone who's I'm working with, right? And of course, when we have all these unmet needs coming into a relationship with a client or a student, then there's the potentiality for misconduct to take place, right? As well. So those are really important tools for me, loving kindness and mindfulness for me.
Beautiful. And of course, that raises a whole larger issue, which maybe we can go back to, about the medicalized nature of psychotherapy and how we all feel about that, or any perspectives. But I want to just pivot to Mustafa for a second, and as a therapist, ask you, how does this work? How does your practice work for you in the therapy chair?
Yeah, I get that's a again, like a very it's like one of those questions that we can spend days trying to unpack, because traditionally in the West, the therapy is in a way either has an element of diagnostic trying to layer, where you're trying to fit someone's experience into some word that would describe something that's wrong with them or that needs fixing, and with the goal of being part of systems, or being part of, being effective or efficient or productive, or whatever word describing success in therapy. So we are shifting from that, probably at a slower pace than I would hope for. And I think the role of practice and contemplative practices is in this space is to unpack those layers and see if we can not only just visibly take ourselves out of the idea that a therapist is going to heal someone or fix someone. It's rather a therapist's role is to be with and find the capacity to be regulated, attuned, attentive in the therapeutic space. So that can look different from one person to the other, but for me, it's taking a few breaths before starting and remembering to breathe all throughout. Everything that I learn, whether from a contemplative practice or Western psychotherapy, I keep in my back pocket, but my intention is to be as present as I possibly can, and to allow myself the trust the emergence of what's needed and what's showing up for a client that I'm with. I'm not necessarily always applying meditation practices in session, I'm applying mindfulness embodiment and mindfulness scaffolding of non-judgmental awareness, gentleness, the girly things that Sharon has mentioned, the wonderful girly things, with also the clarity of the therapeutic goal, which is not to try to change someone to fit in. It is rather to help clients recognize more what's showing up for them and to allow them to access safety within self, so that they can replicate that relationship outside of the therapeutic space or hour. And that's not always accessible. That's not always accessible for folks who live in spaces where they don't necessarily feel they can be authentically themselves. And at least if I can do anything is to offer them that space within the therapeutic hour to just let go of their guards, their protective mechanisms, and learn how to just be and allow gentleness and kindness to unfold as it needs to. So it's, again, like there's so many, it looks different depending on obviously what someone is looking for in therapy. I'm not trying to kind of force these intentions on anybody. These are kind of it's the approach and the attitude that I carry in session. And obviously, if someone is showing up to say, to therapy with an intention that is very specific, to say, for example, I want to be able to succeed at work, and or something that's very specific, kind of like very goal oriented and action based. Again, I'm not trying to unpack the depth of that intention in ways that are disruptive of their needs. I'm trying to respect that, but at least I know that if I can, I'm also allowing them to learn more about who they are and how can they love who they are without having to fit in the demands of the work environment if it's not welcoming of who they are, at least in that therapeutic space. So it's a journey. I don't do it well all the time. I'm not always successful at it, but that's the intention that I have, at least, or it's kind of what motivates me as a therapist.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. And I think in your comments and in Lamarad's, I hear, it's something that we often talk about in the contemplative psychotherapy program is just, in a way, well, there's clearly a dovetailing or overlap between psychotherapy as a tradition and practice and Buddhist healing, right? Because they're both very psychologically minded. They're both trying to sort of provide healing by relating, but with sort of healing relationships that help bring others into contact with their own inner resources they didn't know were there. At the same time, and they both have a kind of critical or scientific understanding of that we're not just what we think we are. that there's a causal, there's sort of a complexity or causality or momentum of evolution, of development, of society. But I guess one of the ways this often comes up is in terms of the difference between, Buddhist teaching, being a Buddhist teacher, and Lamarad, you were alluding to this, a mentor teacher, and being a psychotherapist, and the key element in Buddhism of really seeing what your role as really helping the person find their own inner Buddha, right? So sort of seeing the person as potentially already awakened and having the inner capacity to heal, as opposed to seeing them as somebody you need to fix or as something that having something that needs fixing. And I wonder, Sharon, if you have any thoughts about how that plays out in terms of your conversations with therapists as opposed to Dharma teachers.
Yeah, before then, I want to just say a word about caregiving, because I think the question for therapists fits into, in a way, the larger context of that. And, I've emphasized the work with caregivers for a long time, and as much as I can. And I find, there's some people who are caregivers within their family, there's some professionally, and then there's some who just assume that role whenever they meet a new friend. They're the caregiver, and it's maybe people who are on the front lines of suffering who are at different levels of society, and some really uncelebrated and unheralded. And the question comes up of what do you do for resilience, which is not a very popular question in some circles, because these are the givers, they're not supposed to be receiving. These are people who maybe are expected to have no boundaries and only expectations about their performance. And so there's a lot about Buddhist wisdom, or just wisdom, that comes into play, that we're not in control of the outcome of events. We can only, look back at our intention and do the best we can, things like that. And these are hard to come by in ordinary circles. And so I found it really riveting kind of work, because these people work really hard, and are doing an incredible amount for society. And it's often so hidden. And the things that one has done are sometimes not done, because you get too busy and it's too overwhelming and there's too much to do and someone else needs you. And so to have a level of equanimity is really different than needing more compassion, and that kind of exploration I found really interesting. And, I worked for 4 years as part of this program, bringing tools of yoga and meditation to domestic violence shelter workers, to frontline workers in the shelters. And one of the things we always did, which I took many other places, was we asked people in the beginning to basically do a kind of journaling exercise, which was one column of which was, what do you do to lift your spirits, to get perspective, to get on more of an even keel? And then people would write down whatever. And then the next column was, now look back at what you just wrote down and how do you feel about it? And sometimes people had written, I drink a lot. And then they looked back and they said, maybe that's a problem. And once somebody, when I took this exercise somewhere else, somebody wrote down, I love nature, I get out of nature, I kayak, it means the most. And then what he wrote down was, I haven't done it in about 7 years. You think, well, maybe get on it, so even just reflecting on what we ordinarily do, and contemplative practice may be a part of that for sure. And then we would talk about that. So I think it's just important issues for everyone probably to look at in terms of our roles. And as to your question, I'm not a psychotherapist, I'm not a clinician. I may be the only person somebody's talking to. And so that figures in as well, but that could figure in for the friend as well. And so I always say I have a specific set of tools. And just as a human being, I can tell you this is my experience, or which I would not do, necessarily at all, of course, if I was a professional therapist. And I think honestly, it's like Mustafa said, a lot of it is just creating the space, to see what emerges, not to be giving advice necessarily at all, but that I can do no matter what role I'm in, is really working with that.
Beautiful. I know folks are kindly putting some questions in the chat, which I'm thrilled about. And, we definitely intend to turn to some of those very soon. I'm wondering if, perhaps I can start to take a look at those, but I'm wondering, Lama Rod, if you have any thoughts about how, how it impacts you and you're working with folks to really think of them as Buddhas, because I've heard this from a number of our faculty who are therapists and also Dharma practitioners. Mm-hmm. And I can say myself as a person who is wearing both hats, just makes such a difference to, there's a whole different kind of relationship between you as a helper or caregiver and the person you're with, if you're thinking we're both in it together and
Mhm.
have that capacity as much as I do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's important to meet others in relationships with holding this view that they are already awakened, but also holding the view that they, like you, have the potential to really transcend the conditions and the experiences of suffering in the moment, right? That becomes harder, however, when we're sitting with someone who actually embodies a kind of violence directed towards us. So when I'm sitting with people who are queerphobic or racist, right, that becomes a lot harder for me to hold, right? And so this goes back to the work that we're having to do for ourselves as caregivers, right? To make sure that I have a system and a structure of care for myself so that I can enter into a challenging relationship with someone who has forgotten their Buddhahood, right? And to make sure that I actually hold the space. And holding space for me means that I disrupt reactivity to everything, right? And I allow myself to experience what arises for me in the relationship that I'm having. If I don't allow myself to experience and I get really distracted and I start reacting to everything, right, that's coming up. Yeah. But I think that's where we have to be right now in the world, is to come back to a mindset that, yeah, everyone's inherently awakened, right? But we are kind of distant from that experience of awakening right now. And we're helping each other return back home to that fundamental expression of being awakened and free, right? And this is collective care, right? So that means that I am relying on community to help mirror back to me who I am and how to get back to who I am, who I fundamentally am, right?
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting questions, I mean, to me, I think this is one of the big differences between Buddhist approaches to healing and contemplative, even contemplative psychotherapy or psychotherapy as we know it in the West, is the role of community, and that sense that that it's focused on normalizing suffering in a way, or sharing the burden of suffering rather than thinking of it as just in one person or another, and kind of facing how much it is a part of all of our lives and how we share that. But I think that those resources of bringing a sense of communal or collective togetherness and shared awareness of the problems of life, or the solutions, right, or the sort of alternatives, it seems so important. And I wonder, I mean, I've thought a lot about it, that in my practice, as both someone who teaches Dharma and someone who does psychotherapy, is how to sort of really bring these benefits together. So I don't know if Mustafa, if you have any thoughts about that, or Sharon or Lama Radha, this is something I think we need to do. I mean, it's happening, but I'm just curious how you see maybe, ways that we can create bridges between these different approaches. Mustafa, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah. What was showing up for me, I suppose, is again goes back to what's our intention, whether as teachers of this wisdom, or folks who are interested in supporting others in their healing or transformation. Is it to what's our intention? So is it to do things in a way that allows us to just survive survive in a system that doesn't celebrate us? Are we going to go against those systems? Do we use the same value structures that are currently being revered, which is success and perfectionism and all the different ways we envy each other and try to kind of race to achieve concepts of continuous growth and whatnot. So even in Buddhist practices, the concepts of transformation and resilience can also be, with that Western perspective, be misinterpreted. As we're trying to change who we are, we're trying to transform from not being, good enough to being good enough, or not being liked to being liked, or based on values of society. So I think just always trying to remind ourselves, what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to find, our way back home with ourselves, so we feel more at ease, so that we're less tight, less tense, and less judgmental of ourselves, and that mirrors in our relationships? Or are we trying to race to achieve something that is unattainable? And for a lot of us, as Sharon's mentioned in her early career, and Lama Rod is experiencing in his work as well, the world is not designed for folks like us in that sense, in that Western concept of, being efficient and productive and successful and happy and all those superficial, and there's nothing wrong with them either, right? Like we all live in that space, and we're all trying to work with what we have. But what's truly, what are we really longing for? What does belonging really look like? Mm-hmm. Is it just the external, or is there actually longing to share with others who we truly are, and to also be loved and be seen, and to offer others the same?
So, thank you, Mustafa. I mean, so that's the issue of the values with which we practice, whether we're practicing spiritual practice or we're practicing therapy, and that's so critical. And of course, I'm old enough to remember the 60s and 70s, when psychotherapy was very much a cultural force, and it was helping to raise some of these questions about the meaning of life, and importance of love and relationships, and just love in the world. And of course, I've also then watched slowly that culture being sort of medicalized and instrumentalized and corporatized, and turned into an engine to advance what had been sort of the more dominant values of our culture, which is to sort of consume, achieve, dominate, win the contest. And so I think that's certainly one of the very welcome things about this confluence to me, is that it challenges psychotherapy as a culture to remember some of those values, and this sort of, and really the basic, what we're learning about the science, which is that those things don't make us happy. The sort of the getting the next, having more stuff, or more titles, or more, Instagram followers, or whatever, doesn't really lead to happiness. It's can we connect with ourselves and others? Can we connect with community? And what are we doing to develop that? So I do think that that's, in my work, one of the things that I do, Sharon, often related maybe to people you've worked with in the health world and the caregiving world, is I work with cancer survivors, women recovering from breast cancer, and really these are what's amazing is to see how much hunger there is. I mean, of course, in that context, somebody's had a sort of a death sentence, right? And then they feel like they want to, when they get treated, they want to really reevaluate what their life is about, and their relationships, and their roles. And So really being able to create a culture where people can ask these questions and even ask the questions about conventional medicine, like why do my doctors don't talk to me about the fact that I might die, or don't talk to me about my relationships. So I think that there's a tremendous synergy that or kind of a rejuvenation that can happen in the culture of mental health through being in dialogue with these teachings. And part of the reason why I founded Nalanda Institute was to create a place where people that I'm working with as clients or students could come and learn, and there could be more of a dialogue or bridge. I know one of the questions one of our audience asked was really sort of how do we create a bridge between these two cultures to help optimize this, the synergy that they can offer each other. I don't know if that raises any thoughts for either you, Lamarad, or Sharon. Also, we've had some other questions, so let me know.
Yeah, I would just say I think the dialogue itself is very exciting, because I am old enough to remember when it just wouldn't happen, and we've been in situations where people have talked about how different it is, now when, I knew therapists or people in the academy who, if they had a meditation practice, that was a secret, you just didn't talk about that. And it probably not everywhere, but in many places it is so different now. So, and the dialogue enhances both sides. There's a lot to learn. I like to think of meditation teachers having a sensibility that they're still students. I mean, I certainly think I'm still a student, and there's a lot to learn about life and being and happiness and the mind and all of that. And so it's not just in one direction that this kind of enrichment or learning happens. And on the one hand, we can all help each other in very direct ways in terms of one's own well-being and in terms of what we transmit to the individual. And also, on the other hand, it's a sense of vision. I remember being at a conference on Buddhism and psychotherapy or meditation. It's probably Buddhism and psychotherapy maybe 30 years ago. And the question came up for the therapist, have you ever designed a care plan, which I guess has a goal in mind, that involved people helping other people or serving in some way, or is it always about one's individual well-being? And I don't think anybody there said they ever designed at that point a care plan, in fact, whatever the word is, the term is, for somebody that involved service or connection to others. So that would be an example of something that would change a culture if it hasn't already changed.
So yes, and so I think there are a couple of questions that have come up from the audience that might be fun for us to look at or instructive. So one is comes from the other side of someone who's in the realm of working as a Buddhist teacher. What kind of guidelines do Buddhist teachers need to be mindful of in terms of when they need to reach out to mental health care folks? And I mean, how do you folks handle that, Sharon, Lamarad, if you feel someone needs professional help or support, of another kind? What are the guidelines you use, and how do you work in the other direction?
Well, I would say too, just to point out that Dharma teachers aren't regulated in the same way mental health professionals are, psychotherapists and so forth. We don't have like a professional accrediting, association that actually oversees professional ethics and standards in the industry of Buddhist teaching, right? In a way that makes this kind of work difficult, but in a way it also lends itself to the evolving of creativity and innovation, and the skillful means that Dharma teachers have been invested to exercise to get people free from suffering, right? I chose to undergo several professional development programs, including divinity school, right? Because I felt like I needed some level of accountability and professional training as a Dharma teacher, because I didn't get that from my lineage, that I trained in. And so over the years, I've just developed relationships with therapists and other associations, and I've learned how to understand what my role is. And this is incredibly important, is that I think for Buddhist teachers, we have to understand what it is that we do and the slippery slope between spiritual support and mental health diagnosing, right? And we can slip back and forth across that line. My relationship to students is not to diagnose, but to hold space and to offer support around practice so that they can actually begin to connect to their own innate awareness and compassion, right? If I am in a situation, I have quite often been in situations with students in a session where their needs actually transcend the limitations for myself as a Dharma teacher, then I'm able to say, you know what, maybe you should check out this organization, this association, or this person, because it sounds like the support that you need is actually much more along the lines of professional psychology and mental health support, right? I see that as my role as being a facilitator to help people, to point people towards resources offered by people who are trained to offer those insights.
Yeah. Right, and I do think that with the whole development of trauma-informed care, the understanding that even this relatively innocuous practices of meditation can make us more aware of things and give us access to things that we're not able to regulate at the moment. I think a lot of teachers are becoming sort of just living in this, and we have some of our lunchtime meditation teachers, for example, are asking for these kinds of to shine a light on some of these areas, and how do we work with the gray area? How do we work with someone who really probably could use all kinds of help or help from multiple directions?
I think just quickly, I think Buddhist teachers should be really interested in further professional training, either in mental health or in divinity or chaplaincy, or professional ethics. I think that's really important. I think that lineages and the Buddhist institutions that many of us are being trained in as teachers should require that as a further step to enter into the world as professional Buddhist teachers. It's been incredibly important for me to be a trauma-informed teacher. Like that's necessary now because trauma is so prevalent in our relationships, and religious-based and spiritual-based trauma, should be something that we're really tuned into.
Beautiful. And well, there's some other questions that I think are sort of on the flip side. Some of our audience is pointing out that psychotherapists no longer are required to do their own psychotherapy in training. And so, really oftentimes, even though people get a license, they may not really be encouraged or doing that, have the skills or training to do that inner work. So, to what extent, how do we combat that, or how do we fill that need? And I think that's part of where Nalanda Institute and our contemplative psychotherapy program fits in. That's part of the reason why we thrive, I think, because people are aware that conventional psychotherapy training has these holes or gaps, and that we need ways to continue to deepen our personal learning. As Lama Rod mentioned earlier on, he doesn't want to sit with a therapist who doesn't do that more. Again, I don't blame them. I don't either. So yeah, I don't know. Mustafa is going to check in with you. I don't know if you have thoughts about whether we can, maybe there's a way in which we can advocate for some of these practices to be standard training in psychotherapy training programs.
Yeah, well, I got into psychotherapy in the same way that maybe Lamarat's mentioning. I used to guide a weekly meditation group. Where I kind of still supporting it, but I'm not doing it every week anymore. But I've been doing that for, I don't know, 11 years or so. And after each session, someone would come, someone would show up and say, like, I'm going through this tough time and I don't know what to do. And I find myself kind of in a situation where I feel like I need to find more resources. And I was very fortunate to work with you, Joe, and be part of your intention, which is to create a space that integrates both Western psychotherapy and Eastern practices. So I've been very lucky in that way. I'm finding now that a lot more therapists are getting aware of mindfulness, but they don't practice it themselves. They tell their clients, just go take a meditation group or go to a meditation space. And I think it's on the therapist the therapist should be aware also that practicing mindfulness can be triggering for some folks, and they should be able to recognize when someone's in a space where perhaps closing their eyes or connecting with their breath is not the most helpful space to start. So I think it's also part of, we should be able to maybe start to learn more about what mindfulness is and what it isn't in this Western context, so that we're able to suggest it for folks in the right capacity.
Yeah.
And then as a teacher, I also encourage folks to be very specific with their language and to know the population they're working with in the context that they're providing the teaching. So, for example, if you're working with, the queer community, you don't want to necessarily invite them to close their eyes and think about their inner child and childhood events, because unless you really know this group. So lots of practices need to be provided. If you're doing teaching mindfulness in a group and unsure of who you're teaching it to, maybe you don't know them well enough or know their background, to do what we're doing now, which is to try to be as very general and encompassing as possible, even though sometimes it doesn't feel specific enough, but at least we're trying to provide language that is as inclusive as possible and not too triggering. Not to say that we similar to what Sharon mentioned, we can be really attached to the outcome because we don't know what will show up for someone. And this is not about rushing to fix folks if they're going through a dissociative experience. They just need to be able to have the tools to try not to overstimulate someone, and also if you can recognize the cues that they're carrying more than their capacity, to do that to do something helpful to reground or recenter them if you can. Group setting, if you're teaching a group, especially if you're doing this online and you can't even see who you're talking to, which is the case for us at the moment. But yeah, there's I get lots of insights and feedback that I'm sharing here on different angles. But the fact that we're speaking to each other and having this panel, I think is just wonderful. It's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and I just want to share that some of our UK colleagues in the chat are saying they are required to have a psychotherapy, and they are also given access to regular meditation training. So some of this is maybe a local problem for the US and the very strange and ineffective system of healthcare that we have here. Which kind of brings me to another issue that I think, in terms of the larger public health dimension of mindfulness and so on, one of the things that I think, people have a lot of concerns about vis-a-vis the mindfulness revolution is the way in which we in the West have sort of really appropriated mindfulness separate from the ethics, the wisdom, the culture that it's part of, and are using it as a kind of tool to make people more productive, or to make more money, or to otherwise ramp things up. And so I guess just I'd be curious for your thoughts, Sharon and Lamurad, how you feel about the culture of how mindfulness is actually being interpreted and used, and what needs to happen to ensure that the whole healing benefit comes across. And I would just welcome Camilla. I don't know if you're actually with us, but Camilla Majid, one of our who was initially going to moderate this panel, wasn't able to join earlier, and it looks like she may be joining now.
Yes. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. It's so good to see you. So good to be connected in all meanings of that word. We have had major power outages here in California. And of course, one affected me this morning. So I'm frantically trying to get power, and my cell phone had zero receptivity or capacity to call, as did all my Wi-Fi. So thank you for carrying the ball forward and for letting me join now. And please just continue and let me support in any ways that I can. I know we have these dialogues as a series, so I'm happy to just support or assist in any way today.
Yes, well, Camilla, thank goodness that you're okay, and that they got the power back on. It's lovely to see you. And I just want to mention that you are really kind of right at the intersection of some of the concerns we're bringing up here as someone who is professor of mental health and social work in California, and also an equity and inclusion consultant, and just someone who writes tremendously and wrote a beautiful chapter for our advances on the whole history of decolonizing approaches to psychotherapy. We're just so thrilled that you were able to join us, and we were just sort of diving into the way in which the mindfulness culture especially in the US, but I would say maybe in the West, has been appropriated by whether it's corporate or other kinds of hard driving perfectionistic trends, the wellness culture, and so on. And so we'd love to hear any thoughts you have about how to sort of counter that, or ensure that the whole culture of mindfulness gets represented and alive, stays alive.
Yes, well, first of all, thank you so much to Joe and to Tricycle and to Nalanda for all of the work that it went into organizing this. And I'm really excited to be here with my esteemed colleagues whose work I love and learn from in so many ways. Sharon, Lamurad, just so much appreciation for your work. And of course, your work, Joe, and your leadership. It's interesting because one of the questions that I know you were broaching was, kind of the why of it, right? And the why of it is important because if people are approaching meditation, mindfulness, contemplative practice of any kind with the idea of, kind of blissing out is what I call it. I just want to bliss out and get into my own kind of headspace. Then what's the difference between that and, having a drink or, you know what I mean? Like it's temporary. But if you want the deep, sustaining sense of fulfillment and wisdom and courage and self-expansion, then you want to approach your meditative practices in a way that's inclusive of self-transformation, right? And self-transformation is hard, so and in self-transformation, you face all your rage, and And in self-transformation, you develop the equanimity that Sharon writes about. And I really feel like those are that's the wealth of the practice. It feels like that's 90% of all of the contemplative practices. And when I say contemplative practices, I'm not just talking about sitting down doing mindfulness practice or even Buddhist practice. I know that as folks who think about mental health and behavioral health, our own and that of other people, that we really want to, adjust our own lens, maybe sit with our own biases to privilege, certain traditions over others, that we don't hear as much about the deep Islamic or deep Sufi practices that ground many people in the world's contemplative engagement. So I feel like there's a lot of growth to be advanced for those of us who lead contemplative work, that we get to become more inclusive about how we see it. And the last thing I'll say is that those of us who do mental health work, who are therapists, as someone who has practiced clinically myself, has been an educator for a therapist for about 25 years, and as someone who has sought therapy, I can tell you, and been in great therapy and been in terrible therapy, I can tell you that, there's a lot of racism in the mental health practice, a lot of sexism, a lot of, trans exclusion, a lot of ableism. Oh my God. In many ways, the mental health profession has helped codify all those things. So I feel like there's also a great opportunity. And one of the things I'm honored to do is to support clinicians, therapists, in using our meditative practices to explore our own racism and internalize racism, to explore our own, gender concepts, to explore our own ableism, because until we do that, then we're not really applying contemplative practice to our development as mental health clinicians. So just a few thoughts. Thank you.
So such a wealth of thoughts. Thank you so much. Very exciting to have you join us and share your perspective. Sharon Lumrud, I don't know if you want to chime in at all about sort of the larger issue of how this culture is being received and how it could be used to promote genuine growth or transformation, not only individually, but collectively.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it goes back to what Lama Rod said earlier about how, as a community or profession, so to speak, there's no regulation, there's no licensing, there's no idea of continuing education as a requirement, and it's kind of the Wild West out there. I because I am older, and I come from a kind of traditional background where I teach because my teachers asked me to teach. It wasn't that I did a 3-day training and decided that's cool, so that's different. And what does it mean to be a teacher, and what's the responsibility in terms of continuing education and learning, and including in all these realms, because this is the world we live in. And it's different. And so there will be a variety of manifestations, and that's fine. It's just the way it is. And one has to, within oneself and a community of peers, so to speak, forge your way, and make your way. And it's not going to be as attractive, perhaps, in the general public eye, but I recently was having a conversation with somebody about marketing, and I was recalling a time when I think it was a CD I had done, some product. And when I received the marketing materials to check them, which I always ask to do, the first line was something like, this is about loving kindness meditation. It was something like, 1 minute of this practice and your heart will melt like butter in the sun. And I wrote to them and I said, I don't think that's going to happen in a minute, actually. If it happens at all, might be a little different than that. And so trying to do your best as a human being of some integrity, you're always confronted with these possibilities and opportunities, and need to have a sense of clarity and support from a community that, I always take out the word productive from anything written about me, or supposedly I'm teaching. And I'm sure I miss things, in which case I'm sure I'll get feedback, from people. But that's a very precious thing, that I will get feedback, and I don't feel like I am in a position to try to regulate what other people do, except to, if they invite me.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, I would also add to Sharon's sharing as well. Yeah, there is, this kind of unregulated nature. I mean, and Sharon has probably seen everything. You've been there from the very beginning, so, and I'm relatively new, right? As a professional teacher, I've been teaching professionally for 11 years, practicing over 20 years at this point. But so much of, that kind of mentality of being unregulated means that some of us step up as regulators, because that's part of what it means to take responsibility in your community. Like, if you see something happening, then you have to intervene, right? And I have often intervened, around, things I've seen, misconducts, financial misconduct, ethical misconduct, sexual misconduct and abuse. And then we have to see more of that. So, like, it's not that, like, we have to be regulated as a profession or an organization, but we have to take more responsibility. There's a lot of silence that enables a lot of harm in the field of, Buddhist teaching, right? And that's what I'm really interested in, as well. And then just, recognizing some of the things that, the pioneers or the elders in Western, Buddhism have faced. Of course, Sharon can speak much more to this, but like there have been some real violence, and gatekeeping, and so forth, that really has restricted, people really being public. People always come to me and say, "Oh, you're the first Black Lama I've ever met," and I'm like, well, I'm not the first. I just kind of sneak through somehow, and made a way into a public platform. But I'm certainly not the first Black Western Lama to emerge from Tibetan Buddhism, right? But I've learned how to navigate the violence of anti-Blackness, and that's important. So I try to offer that back. Like, these are my experiences. I hope that this helps you to navigate, what can be quite harmful for us. We just, I just want to help people get free and to be happier and to have access to the resources that they need to be well. That's all I'm doing. That's all I want to do, right? But we also have to learn how to navigate the ways in which people don't want us to do that.
I agree with all of that.
Yeah.
And I have certainly experienced the damage of that kind of silence. I was more reflecting on, people ask me, what do I think about this training program or that training program, or and I always just say, I think that there's continuing education, including education about trauma, including about behavior, about racism, and so on, is essential in this day and age. But I don't feel like when somebody gives me their card and says, I'm a mindfulness coach, and I have no idea what that means. I have on occasion said, "Who was your teacher?"
Yeah.
Because that's my experience,
Exactly.
is that you have a teacher, and often that's a totally irrelevant question.
Yeah.
And so, and yet I also honor the fact that a lot of these people are doing incredible work in venues where I don't venture,
Right. And that's some of the complication, the complex feelings I have around the accessibility of mindfulness now, right? That it's super accessible. Everyone's getting trained to be a mindfulness teacher. Everyone's getting access to these professional opportunities as a mindfulness teacher. But, I come from this kind of same school of thought as Sharon. Sharon was, as one of my teachers too, like all of, she taught us so much about our practice, but like I was trained to always be held by a teacher right? In the same way as mental health professionals, like you're trained to have a supervisor, you have to have a supervisor that you're checking in with, right? And a lot of mindfulness professionals don't have that accountability, with another teacher. A lot of mindfulness teachers, the problem is that like we freely offer the title of mindfulness teacher when in fact, we should be actually saying mindfulness instructor or professional. A teacher is someone who deeply embodies the system and path of practice, who has been practicing for longer than the length of a training program to get, a professional credential, right? So I think it gets confusing, in terms of the language that we're using to identify people. So that's where some of the regulation can be really helpful for me. Like, what are you? Are you a teacher, or do you just offer some of the basic principles of mindfulness in certain contexts?
And it's the metaphor you used of the Wild West is in many ways appropriate, Sharon, because, if we think about that notion of the Wild West, what we see is these colonizers and these kind of extractivist folks thinking, how much land can I grab? What kind of gold can I find? What kind of property can I find? How can I extract and benefit? So that Wild West, kind of white supremacy colonizing mindset has very much come to apply to the realm of contemplative practices, because people are like, how can I get in on this game and on this hustle and make some money, right? And not saying that that's not often coupled with really good intentions for the person to grow themselves and the person for us to expand or enrich something in the world. However, the question that you're all raising, what Lamurad is saying, is that kind of like, who's regulating the regulators? And how is the regulation, how do we make sure the regulation doesn't replicate white supremacy? Because white supremacy is certainly replicated in the regulation of mental health and behavioral health. It's all, kind of based on a lot of presumed objectivity. I mean, you can think about the characteristics of white supremacy and just see them in the mental health realm, right? So it's based on some presumed objectivity, which there is none. It's certainly based on getting a lot of money from the regulation process. Those of us who have clinical licenses know that we feed those channels with our money, and that it doesn't necessarily reflect, like I'm just talking about the regulation of mental health practice, doesn't necessarily reflect deep skills, certainly doesn't necessarily reflect deep empathy. So I think that in addition to asking people, who is your teacher? And I would pluralize that to say, who are your teachers? Because if you just have one, then, in terms of engaging with the world, you may not be able to see it from multiple perspectives, right? If I have only one lineage and I've studied only one lineage as a teacher, I have to recognize who that might limit my capacity to teach, right? So if I've only taught Buddhists and I've only taught with people who grew up in the Buddhist tradition, then how do I embrace and teach in a way that's inclusive of Sufi wisdom? If I haven't done so, if I haven't tried to expand my realm from teacher to teachers, right? And then, like Lamurad saying, many folks have not had African heritage teachers, and it is a beautiful mercy and fortune to be able to do so, to have teachers from multiple ethnic and spiritual heritages. So I really feel like we get to support that. And when it comes to our teachers, asking who are their teachers, and also asking them, how do you regulate your own bias as a teacher, right? It's a straight up question. When I go to therapy, when I go looking for a therapist, I ask, what are your approaches? Are you more cognitive, behavioral, psychoanalytic? I'm asking who their teachers are. And the same thing when we are seeking out a mindfulness teacher or interested in being taught by someone, get a sense of how they approach it inclusively and how they check their own biases as a teacher, because all of that white supremacist stuff from education also comes into teaching. It's the teacher bequeathing as opposed to the teacher being in a relational, mutually learning experience, which is what a contemplative process should be. It should not be the sage on the stage. It should be mutual growth. So there's so many questions. I feel like we can offer a lot of guides to ourselves, to one another, and to folks who are just entering the mindfulness realm to really be precise and be discerning as we select teachers and as we grow as teachers.
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm just thrilled to hear this, to be part of this conversation, and because you see the vibrancy that having the confluence of traditions, right, and having, the sort of the dialogue between, spiritual contemplative approaches to healing and being, and Western sort of modern, colonizing Western therapy, professionalized, medicalized Western therapy. And you hear this deep conversation that is really what needs to be happening, right? And so at least I think it's wonderful to be here as part of this, to sort of be realizing like there's so much we need to do if we really want to see that our work is actually making a difference and leading to some real benefit. On the other hand, it's really wonderful that given the global confluence of different traditions, and given the dialogue between, spirituality and psychotherapy, that there is this meeting of minds, or these questions are being raised and asked as we're raising them here. So that's really exciting to me. I also want to come back to, Camilla, what you raised about the dialogue with other spiritual traditions. And I think, thinking of you, I mentioned earlier that it's so important that the roadmap of, sort of breaking down the silos, or the sort of the wall between, science and religion in the West, that the dialogue with Buddhism and neuroscience has opened the floodgates for this larger dialogue that's been put off between science and technology, the sort of the engines of industrialism and colonialism and so on, and the traditions that hold value and humanity and ethical wisdom about how to live together, how we live well together. And so we're hoping, certainly in our collection, we have a beautiful piece from her name escapes me right now. The author of, who wrote The Baptist Buddhist, our faculty.
And Willis, Dr. Willis, yes.
And just how important it is that we, we're all really looking deeply at the various lineages that have influenced us, and how to bring the best out of them, whether it's Western psychotherapy, our own spiritual background, Buddhism, or whatever, and really be looking at them as, how is this benefiting my humanity and others' humanity and our collective humanity? Yeah. So we are at a point now where I guess we would normally be taking some questions. I think we, and I know a few folks have raised their hand, but I'm not sure how to get their questions. Can someone help us with that? Let's see.
Joe, can you open the Q&A thing at the bottom of your screen? Or I don't know if you're on a desktop or...
Yeah, so, all right. Oh, we have some great questions here. I'm not sure where to begin. Okay. Let's see, as a psychologist who provided clinical supervision, students are no longer required. I think I did actually read this earlier. Isn't there a slippery slope of separating the Dharma teaching from responsibility, suggestive of licensing, and so on? Right, so I think that's another sort of professional, sort of boundary question, right? Which I think there's not an easy answer to. Okay, so I'm just going to take Josh's question. right. So this is about Judeo-Christian contemplative practices. I would point out that in addressing problematic discourses, the notion of Judeo-Christian actually does not exist and fails to understand the underlying assumptions of a certain Western approach to Judaism, which is influenced by Christianity in particular, right? Certainly that's true. And my reservations about how we move beyond the oppressive discourse and also use Kabbalistic contemplative traditions and bring them into the dialogue with Buddhism and psychotherapy. So yes, let me go back to some of the earlier questions. Okay. I find myself, so this is a question from Aiden. My question is about the system of therapy. As already touched on, the industry seems to deselect for contemplation. The deeper I go, the more I find myself falling upwards, but succeeding downwards. I'm not sure what that, how have you as established professionals managed to do this work based in humility and self-care and also make a name for yourselves in an industry that rewards preeminence and self-abandonment? I can't believe you just got lucky. The more I sit with the nameless, the more I struggle to envision a path where I can make myself a name in this, can succeed in making this my work as a viable career. So yeah, I think, perhaps Camille, I don't know if you want to talk about how you've managed to combine the different threads of your spiritual and professional development, because I know you also work with a lot of young students in mental health and maybe witness these kinds of challenges about how people can sort of grow as humans or maintain connection to something spiritual and also be effective or survive the system, I guess, in some way, navigate the system.
Well, I think it's a really, I appreciate, thank you for the question. It's an honest question, and it's a real question in terms of just how we evolve in this world and how we develop and how we kind of begin to language and envision coming into ourselves. And I'm very responsive to language because I understand that it not only reflects how we see reality, but it affects how we shape reality. So I will say, you already have a name for yourself, that this piece where we learn, and that's just from my heart, because I understand what that's driven by. I heard it growing up. You got to make a name for yourself in this world. You already have a name for yourself. You know what I mean? Like your presence and your power are already established. And so my prayer, my prayer for all of us as we approach this is that we do so from a place of deep knowing that we're already worthy, right? We're already worthy of the accolades and of the deep respect. And we also already have deep wisdom. And we get to be really engaged in our practice to develop. I started practicing Buddhism at age 17. My mother, Laila Majid, began this practice of chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo to develop her own enlightenment and encouraged me to do the same as a pathway to self-knowledge and also as a pathway to figuring out what I was supposed to do in the world and how. So my daily practice is, okay, how do I deepen my wisdom for my well-being and to improve the world? And that's a daily, every single solitary morning and evening practice. So when you ask the question, how, of course, I have to say, practice deeply and in a way that gives, in ways that deepen your own insight and your clarity about that very question, that there's no one who can say, well, here's your path, just follow this, right? However, your practice, I feel, opens pathways and opportunities. And and the right ones for you to follow. I really do feel that we are deeply and energetically connected with everyone around us, with the environment around us. And so if we are engaging in practices that allow us to experience that connection, the pathway to contribution develops. And I will seat this in contribution, because if it's seated in, how do I become a star? You know what I mean? We're gonna suffer so much, because even that aspiration is infected with the belief that you're not already a star, right? So you're already a star. How do I become a kind of star that's so bright that it illuminates the brilliance of other people? All of the profound contemplative teachings, Buddhism, Sufism, Islam, are about developing the capacity to enrich humanity. So if that's not the thing, at developing insight to our connection to humanity and enriching humanity. So a lot of people are like, well, why are you throwing social justice into the whole mindfulness kit? I'm like, it was a part of it from the beginning. The Buddha left, especially if you're thinking about Buddhism, but other traditions, every tradition had to leave all this privilege to be seated in reality, to engage in supporting other humans through suffering and learning from suffering. So I would say, beginning from the earth of the truth, that you're already a name, and that all we get to do, all we have the opportunity to do, is to support ourselves and one another in recognizing our connection and healing ourselves and our world. That, like, trust that path, that a deeper embodiment of beautiful life-expanding teachings will work out the details and guide you through the details. I hope that's helpful.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Camilla. Rod, did you want to share something?
Just really quickly, just re-emphasizing Camilla's this emphasis that I hear all the time with young professionals, both in mindfulness and within Buddhism, and also mental health as well, where people are really interested in having a name, being famous. And then I ask them, do you want to be famous, or do you want to do the work? Right? Because there are a lot of folks in our collective communities who aren't actually doing the work, but their social media is really beautiful. Or they are beautiful, attractive people who they use these politics of desirability, right, and conflate them with professionalism or expertise. Like, these are some of the tricks that we're using, right? I just tell people, listen, just do the work, right? Because what you really want is sustainability. You want your work to be sustained. And that's how I started. I wasn't sustainable at the beginning of my teaching life. I just focused on the work, and I focused on my intention. What is my intention? My intention is to get people free from suffering, right? And I just did that, right? And slowly people came along who supported that work, right? And which has allowed me to do what I'm doing today. But if your intention is to get famous, I'm not saying that the person who offered this question is trying to get famous. Absolutely not. But what I think that we're concerned with is sustainability. Will I have what I need to be well if I engage in this work, right? And if you do the work well, then you will get what you need. That's been my experience.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, and I so agree with what Camilla and Lanran have said, that, this is a growing need. There's something, and so we have our own individual path, which is, I know I need to have some kind of spiritual connection to my life in order to be sustainable as a human from one day to the next, right? And that's the first reason to do this work, is to help cope with the pressure that society puts on us, the sense of threat that if I don't, push ahead and achieve something, that I'm nothing, or I'll have I won't belong anywhere. That we need to sort of find a way to resist that, and to give ourselves time as humans to grow in our capacity, both to care for ourselves and to show up and offer something to others. And I think I would just say, though, that as far as if the question you were asking is, how do I get to work in a way where I can live in this kind of connection to spiritual practice and mental health, right? The answer to that is it's happening. Like you're in the right place, because our, in a sense, our mental health traditions are kind of getting more and more bankrupt, or more and more demineralized, or like starved, like they're malnourished. There's only so far you can go if you cut your roots, right? So the modern psychotherapy has sort of cut its roots to the ancient wisdom traditions and healing traditions that really actually Freud himself very much mined to create psychotherapy, and sort of Jung was very interested in. And cutting those roots is a death sentence. So I think understand that if you're trying to get rooted in something that's real and human and has helped many people for a long time, that you're gonna be fine, because that's what's needed, and if you can nourish yourself, then you'll have something left over to help others, and you'll be able to do what you want to do. You'll be able to be in that space of helping yourself and others instead of having to fight for something, So I realize we're heading toward the end of our panel. I'm just wondering if there are any other questions from our audience. And let me just see if anyone else has added any. Okay.
Oh, I see a question from Stephanie that I could speak to really briefly, if you'd like.
Great.
Stephanie's asking, how would you approach striking the balance between being well-versed across various lineages and teachers with being anchored in one practice, picking one boat? So I think that's an important question, because if we want to be inclusive teachers, if we want to be inclusive and expansive in our own interior life, then we get the opportunity to learn from many teachers. As a person who's practicing Buddhism, with the SGI for the last 40 years, I have a particular lineage that I've been practicing with and learning from and deeply rooted in, and that is deeply valuable. And I read very widely, and I engage with teachers, learn from teachers like Lama Rod, like Dr. Salber, like Mustafa. We all, I think that one thing that we have in common, as those of us who are on this panel, is that we read widely and learn widely, and that's what you get to do. That it's not a betrayal of your own lineage to go to a talk or even participate in a sangha or a faith community of another tradition to learn, right? And to support and offer, right? Because the fundamental thing we're trying to augment is the expansion of our own enlightenment and the enrichment of human enlightenment. So, actually being in the community of other teachers, learning from other teachers, diversifying it by spiritual tradition, and absolutely diversifying it by ethnicity. If the predominant teachers in any realm are all European descent, then there's already a problem, right? There's already a problem. If everybody is, like Lama Rod said, on the cover of, I won't say what magazines, but lots of magazines only feature the, pretty white woman as the mindfulness teacher, or you know what I mean. So we know what kind of red flags to look for, and if we don't, then you can certainly reach out to us for more support around that. But to really diversify the reading and the engagement with teachers is important, which is one of the things that's so great about this book that we have co-created. We are all speaking from different lenses about leading wellness, leading contemplative psychotherapy. And my chapter is entirely focused on this. These are people we need to read to understand healing and contemplative practice more broadly. So that would be how I would, of course, stay true to the Sangha you're in, the boat that you're in, while also learning from all the Sangha, all the boats in the sea.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And so as we sort of move to close, I'm wondering if it might be nice to close with a practice. And Sharon, it sounds like you're able to jump in and help us reconnect to our mindfulness.
Sure, I would be delighted to and honored to. Thank you for this gathering and for bringing us all together.
Yeah, and I want
Oh,
to thank all of you really for lending your heart power, your mind power, your life, your whole life experience. It's quite a joy to be in community with you and trying to create something truly helpful and sustainable, as Lama Rod is saying. So thank you for joining us today and for your contributions to advances. Yeah.
so I moved to actually back to my Buddhist roots. And actually we'll do a form of a practice called sharing merit rather than a strict mindfulness practice. If that's okay with you, Joe.
Beautiful.
Because the belief is that when you do something toward the good, like you're kind or you're restrained, like it would be awfully easy to tell a lie and you don't, or you want to learn, you want to study, you question, you doubt, you wonder, which is considered toward the good, by the way. And you take care of yourself, one another, you practice meditation, even if it feels like totally crummy. It's opening us to the presence of, you could say, the good, and we experience it. And so the first part of it is allowing yourself to feel the joy of that. It's not conceit or arrogance to say, we have so many choices, lots of ways of spending time. Here we are, I made this choice. That's terrific. There's goodness within as well as without. And then we dedicate it, we offer it, we share that with others. Because the idea isn't to do something toward the good and lie back on your couch and think, great, I'm like terrific, a good afternoon. But to dedicate or offer the positive energy we generate. And so having come here and done this kind of practice of questioning and wondering and listening and speaking and all of that, why don't we just end with that? Okay. So the first part of it, you can close your eyes or nod, however you feel comfortable, is feeling the joy. We're not so alone. Look at this. And there are people who share our interests, and even if we don't always agree, we share our values. And I took the time, or I've explored these things. I care. This is all positive, and we can feel that within us. Give yourself the credit in a way. Usually we obsess about the negative, things we did wrong and things are wrong. And let's just give a little airtime to this. And then feeling or acknowledging this positive energy, let's offer it, let's dedicate it first to those who helped us, whoever comes to mind. Maybe they helped you have the time to listen to all this, to be part of it. Maybe they helped you long ago. And the words I use, and please feel free to use your own. The words I use are something like, I dedicate the energy of my practice to you. May you be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease of heart. So it's gift giving, it's offering. So just see who comes to mind and acknowledge them in this way. You feel the positive energy, you offer it. And those that are hurting. And an affirmation of the fact that our practice could never be just for ourselves alone. I dedicate the energy of my practice to you. May you be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease of heart. And then with one another, as we've co-created this experience, I dedicate the energy of my practice to you. May you be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And then all beings everywhere. I dedicate my practice to the welfare and happiness of all beings. May all beings be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease of heart. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon, and thanks all of you. Camilla, I'm so glad you've got your power back on and could join us.
Yes to power. Power with, not power over.
Lamurad, thank you so much for your time and sharing. Wonderful to be with you. Mustafa, thank you for your wisdom and kindness. And thank to all of you for joining and made this possible. Carolyn at Tricycle and your Tricycle team, and to all of the folks behind the scenes at Nalanda as well. Thanks so much. And we'll see you next week for our second panel on the healing power of compassion. Thank you all.